Hello, welcome back to Atlas Within. I'm Andres. Today we're going to be covering another Q&A based on some questions submitted by Lawrence Solon. So the questions we'll be covering today are muscle loss. Why is that happening in regards to my current state of things? Is cardio a factor in any type of muscle loss? Is all weight loss deemed positive? Or are there more nuances to it? And then lastly, any dietary changes that can be done in order to promote muscle gain or muscle maintenance. So we'll dive into the first question. Muscle loss. Why is that happening? So usually that happens when you are not having enough protein to maintain the muscle you have. The dietary requirements, or what's recommended, is about 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. And that's just for the average person. That's just something that's recommended by, say, your local doctor, your GP, local government websites. If you go online, that's what you'll find. However, if you are undertaking physical activity, it does increase, and I've seen several articles about that, about how high it can go, and the one that I personally like, and I would say fits a bit more with how I see the protein intake and what I feel makes the most difference, is having between 1.2 grams and 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram. For me, that would probably be around 100, maybe 120 grams per day of protein at my current weight or close to it. And that should maintain the muscle I currently have. Now, I know I'm not having as much protein, but I've definitely increased my protein intake via my dietary foods that I'm having. So I'm having a lot more protein via eggs, for example. That's become kind of a staple of my protein intake, but I do have other meats like chicken and then maybe beef throughout the week. I don't have them regularly, but I do have them on some days, not all the time, but all days I do have my eggs, and I believe they are helping at least maintain muscle mass. So yeah, muscle loss is basically a result of not having enough protein, because you don't ingest enough protein to maintain the muscle you have to repair it, so as eventually the body will break it down, especially if you are on a calorie deficit, because the body is trying to find energy from where it can, and it will look to muscle for that energy, even though it's got a ton of fat, for example, that it might be able to use. It will usually look for muscle to utilize as energy. So that's the first question. Cardio, and how does that fit into the whole muscle loss scenario? Well, similar to what I mentioned about being in a calorie deficit, if you are doing cardio, you are burning more calories, which is increasing the calorie deficit, especially if you're not eating enough. So in that scenario, you are promoting even more muscle loss if you're not having enough protein to maintain it, because the body is once again looking for energy, and it will look to muscle to break it down and use that instead of fat. Fat it will usually go to if you have enough protein to maintain the muscle you have, but also you are exercising. So resistance training really helps in at least maintaining muscle, because it signals to the body that it needs the muscle. But if you're not utilizing it, then the body won't have any reason to keep it around. So that's why resistance training is really good, or strength training is really good when you're undertaking a weight loss diet or weight loss regime, a plan, whatever it might be, because you at least maintain the muscle you have, and you might even gain some, especially if you do up your protein intake more than you had it before, and you are doing these exercises. All of this together will compound to either keeping the muscle you have or actually having more muscle at the end of the plan. So cardio, not necessarily bad. What I would recommend is that you do cardio separate from your strength training. Ideally, you want to do it spaced out either earlier in the day before your strength training or later in the day after strength training, so have a good amount of time between them. Ideally don't have them in the same session. If you do have them in the same session, you want to have it after your strength training as opposed to before. But ideally you want to have them as 2 separate sessions, and then, you know, best scenario, which is what I'm personally doing, is I have it on a completely separate day. So I do strength training one day, and then another day I do cardio. And it just is the best way to separate them out. It keeps the stimulus separate as well, because obviously in cardio you are exercising for more cardiovascular health, more heart health, more endurance health, whereas for strength training you are promoting strength, muscle growth, power output, strengthening the tendons, strengthening even the bones. Different stimulus, similar in some respects, but different focuses. So if you keep them separate, it's just good news all around. Third question was in regards to weight loss and whether or not that's good in terms of generic. So if you are stepping on the scale and you've dropped a kilo, is that a good thing? On a high level, yes, it's a good thing. All weight loss is great in terms of losing weight, and if that is your overarching goal and that's what you want to achieve, then yes, all weight loss is good because you are losing weight. That's exactly what you want to do. The only caveat and the only things that you have to be mindful of is if you do have muscle and you are losing this, then unfortunately the body composition you're going to end up with isn't necessarily going to be the one you may have hoped for. Because if you are losing muscle as well as losing fat and essentially overall weight, then great. You will end up with a very trim figure, but you won't necessarily have, let's say, the corresponding strength, the corresponding muscle to it, just because you are essentially sacrificing the strength muscle side of things for ultimate weight loss. Personally, for me, all weight loss is good because that is my goal, and I've done this several times in my lifetime where I'm just used to losing muscle. It's just something that happens. Unfortunately, I'm not someone that tracks protein all too much because I really want to increase the calorie deficit as possible, and I want to still maintain a balance of food as opposed to having to increase the protein intake. I do like to have carbs, to be honest, for the energy side of it. So I'm used to it, but I do train hard and I do train to be as strong as possible. So just something to bear in mind how you want to look at things, the outlook. But obviously if your goal is weight loss, then yeah, all weight loss is good because it is corresponding to what you want to achieve, and at the end of the day what you want to achieve is the ultimate focus and how you are measuring your progress. So yeah, that's my take on it. That's how I would see weight loss, especially in the current state, the current journey I'm in, because I'm not really looking to do a body recomposition. That would be great if it happens, but at the end of the day, if I do lose muscle but then overall weight and then hopefully quite a bit of fat, then I'll be happy. It'll be fine. It will just mean that at the end of this I might have to work then a bit harder to get my muscle back, watch my diet, and just follow a slightly different plan. It's just the way I want to approach things, and it's up to you how you want to do it. Or if you do want to be more cautious, then a slower weight loss plan is better for you. So nothing too drastic, because the more drastic your plan is, your dietary and calorie deficit, the more likely is that you will lose muscle, because the body is really going to be trying to find energy where it can, and it will find energy from your muscles and the fat storages, and it's just really hard, I think, to maintain muscle in that situation. But if you do a slow gradual one, then you can slowly chip away at more fat as opposed to muscle. Potentially very little to no muscle can be lost if you follow a slightly more gradual plan. And the last question he mentioned was if I'm making any dietary changes. So yes, I'll be making dietary changes to my protein intake. I'm having essentially more eggs this time round. Yep, and then I have chicken, beef throughout the week. So I'm definitely trying to increase my intake in protein. I do feel and see that I am eating more protein than I was before. That is making a difference. And that's, it's as easy as that, essentially, to increase your protein intake, and that will promote more muscle maintenance or gain, depending on obviously how much you're having of it and how much exercise you're doing, strength training specifically, to correspond to utilize all of that. So yeah, that's it. The recommendations I've seen for that is between 30 grams and 50 grams of protein per meal. So obviously that's the ballpark of what you want to have per meal, but that depends on how much you actually want to have throughout the entire day. So obviously break it up into about 3 to 5 even meals, ideally. That's the recommended intake. I have read and seen videos of whether we should have the protein broken up over meals, or if we just have it in one hit, because at the end of the day it's all about how much protein you have for the whole day as opposed to how much you have in every meal. I think there's arguments on both sides of it, but I would say it's definitely easier to consume high levels of protein if you break it up over 3 to 5 meals, as opposed to having one meal all protein of like 150 grams, maybe 200 grams of protein, if that's what you need to have. So yeah, my changes will be to have just more protein in my diet, because I'm not tracking. I think that's the biggest problem I have, because I've decided not to track any of my intake. I'm not tracking calories, I'm not tracking macros, micros, I'm not tracking any of it. I'm kind of just eyeballing a lot of this thing and seeing how I'm doing, based on metrics, based on my weight, based on my look. That's how I'm taking things. So if I was tracking it like I should, like most people do, I would be able to fine tune it a lot better. I'd be able to see where I can have more protein, and then also see where I need to lower other things like carbs, fats, in order to maintain a calorie deficit. And that would be a much more accurate way to do this. But I wanted to see, 90 days wise, what can I do with limited tracking, and just trying to go through life as normal, and then obviously balancing everything else that's happening. But yes, that's my answer to that fourth question. I went on a tangent for that second, but the point is, tweaking my protein intake to promote muscle growth or muscle maintenance, whichever one I meet the needs of, depending on how much protein I'm having, and that should hopefully yield better results. So those are the 4 questions. Thanks again, Lawrence, for submitting those questions. Always great to answer them. Hopefully that's given you a bit more detail in terms of all of those. But if you do have any further follow-up questions you want to ask, feel free to do so, and I'll be more than happy to respond. So thanks again for watching. Catch you on the next one, and have a good one. All right. Bye.